Hello and welcome to another Delboy video. This one is a little bit different to my others and probably a bit more specialised, as what I'd like to do is show off some of the books that I have, but along the lines of the artist known as John Romita. He's my favourite artist on Spider-Man. He's an artist that I have followed from childhood all the way up till now. What you have in front of you here is just two books. One on the left is an omnibus, which is basically a tome of comics in one bound book, and that's to show you the finished product. And to the right is a very special book which you only get in limited numbers, and it is the actual artwork that John Romita drew on in exactly the size that he drew the artistry on. Now, just to put a little show to you on size comparison, a comic book eventually shrinks down to the size that you see in front of you now. Very, very small. But that is now the size that is recognized. So, to the left is an omnibus, which is a much better print format than a comic. And it's really there just to show you what the finished product can look like. So you can see here that it's all coloured and inked, looking lovely. And everything is intact, just as if you'd bought it as a comic book. But what we've got here now is a very special book. And I do apologise if I do this video wrong. I've tried it several times and the camera always gets in the way. But I'm hoping that it comes out okay. So this is what they call an artist edition book. They cost hundreds of pounds. And basically they show off the artwork from the artist. What we have to remember about comic books and the artist's work is that the artist rarely kept the artwork that he produced. He drew on it, sent it away to Marvel. Marvel would give it to an inker if the original artist wasn't inking, and then basically it would be photostated down, printed, and the artwork would either be junked or sold on because they were jobbing artists. So this is my favourite artist, John Romita, and it's a very special book to him as well, because it's actually forwarded to Virginia. That's his wife, who also worked at Marvel at the time. So just a quick table of contents, and then we move over and we come to the first page. Now you might recognize this page in the book that I just showed just now. It may also look a little bit yellow. The reason for that is age, but also yellowing is an indication of glue. So a lot of this work would have been basically drawn on. If the wording needed to be changed, they would glue the new wording over the top, and when it photostated, it basically wouldn't show. You'll also probably notice some blue marks. Don't know if you can see it around here, but that is what they call blue pencil, and blue pencil does not photostat. So that's the very first page of issue 106, and as we move on, you will see that everything here is before the colouring process. What I like about the artwork of John Romita is that he was so dynamic, and his camera angles were more like a film. If you film upwards, you get a rather dramatic pose of somebody cowering above you, which basically gives an immense amount of power. If somebody shoots down and over the shoulder, it usually indicates somebody just about to swoop in, etc., etc. And what generally all comic book artists are exceptionally good at is anatomy. So I'm hoping that you notice that some of the work in here is just exceptional dynamic poses and incredibly clean and nice artwork. Just move over to the next page. And you'll see what I mean. The artist has to do so many different things, like making smoke look like smoke. You can see the thin lines here. John Romita on this particular book was also the inker, so he did lots of ink work. Now, just want to show you some of the ink work that you can see here. You'll see there's little lines. What John Romita did here, which is quite an advanced technique in inking, is to actually use a brush to block in the ink, and then he would get a razor blade and scrape the ink away, giving movement lines. That's a very, very advanced technique and something that you don't see very much now because most things are now digital. So as we move on, you can see how wonderful these compositions are and how dynamic the poses are. So as I was mentioning before, John Romita was very good at follow-on. So you can see the cling on to the building after he's just swung on, and then an overhead looking down at the crowd. And notice the different type of inking that would needed to be done for the crowd compared to the dark inking that would be in the foreground. Just think that John Romita's work is so clean. It's just so pristine at what he does. Love this image here of facing the crowd by hanging on a web line. Just think that's incredible. Now, one thing that John Romita was before he was working for Marvel, and for a long time was a comic book artist for other companies. He did romance comics, which is why Spider-Man during this era had grown up to be a more young adult, and the women that he drew were just so beautiful. You can see the heavy eyeline used on Gwen Stacy here. But every boy that wanted to read Spider-Man basically wanted the action. So as we can see here, we're starting to move towards the end of the book where there'd be a cliffhanger. And as you can see, Peter Parker has changed into his costume, climbing up a wall, and you've got this lovely slight perspective shift, but a behind shot of Spider-Man. And then him throwing himself off and spinning round. But then he gets caught in something. And you can see all of the anatomy, all the muscles being used. And then some gas work until we turn over. And we can see that there's a menace just about to attack him. Look at that giant spider up there with Spider-Man looking like a fly underneath. And then we have the splash page, which basically meant that you had to wait another 30 days before you can actually read the next book. Now, the next book is not the follow-on story, but is put in here because it is what is listed as John Romita's favourite book while drawing Spider-Man through any era. I think it's because he tried to draw it in the way that of his heroes of the time. John Romita is sometimes criticised for trying to imitate other artists, which is not quite true. He was Marvel Director of Art for 10 to 15 years, and he knew the Marvel method of drawing. So when new artists would come in and they would draw, he would have to be there to make corrections. He learnt a lot from Kirby. He followed that work on and passed it on to other artists as they came in. It's things like hand positioning and head angles and movement. Just exceptional work here. This book, you can see lots of this ink lining that I was talking about, where the ink has been scratched away. Now, if you do notice that there's lots of writing around the edges, that would be to the inker, to tell the inker how to ink it. In this particular instance, it would have been for the colorist. And as you can see, there is a lot of variation in this particular book because it's actually based around a Vietnam story. So we can see some forests and some army motifs. And anytime you see the brown, that's glue where something was pasted over the top, a change that needed to be made. Just look at this here, where you can see the inside of the room and the villains talking to each other, and then the villain dangling outside of that building and looking totally surprised by it all. Just exceptional work. Every single one of these pages would have taken hours or possibly a whole day per page to do, and each book had to be out per one book per month. Some artists were working on 2 books or 3 books a month, which meant they had to do this in a week. John Romita sweated over his work, and he always stated that he wasn't the fastest artist in the world, and so basically he panicked towards the end, but he never rushed his work. So sometimes he would do layouts and give the finished work to somebody else. This particular era of Spider-Man, he mostly did all of the work. There were no artists. Just look at the dark inking work that goes on here and the scraping of the lines of the ink that I mentioned before. Every single one has a slightly different angle and a movement where you can see here that Peter Parker is split into 3 distinct images as he leaps over the villain and then gets into a position to punch him right in the face. All of this as a young child was just astonishing for me. And then you'd sometimes get a full page end column, but in this particular instance it's ended on a slight mute note, a dilemma, which didn't require too much action. But just look how beautiful Gwen Stacy looks here. Just wonderful. And what you generally got was a splash page at the beginning. Now on this particular page you can see the blue. Now that would not happen with the photostatting, but blue pencil is basically an indication that the layouts work was still behind it, and he actually inked over the top of his own work. It's just lovely because you can actually see the detail that he used with the blue pencil lines. This one just happens to have Doctor Strange in his ghost astral form, so you can see it would require less inking. But with the dark inking and the light inking, it makes everything look bold. Just look at that dynamic pose of Spider-Man clinging onto the wall there and looking around. It's wonderful. And I really do like this one where you're looking behind Spider-Man and seeing the astral form go back into Doctor Strange. Very unusual artwork. This one is from the very, very early 70s. And in here, you can almost see the sort of type of curtain this is, that beaded type curtains. Makes it look like rain. Lovely. And such a dynamic pose here where they're both jumping out of the window to head off into action. But I think what a lot of people don't really comment about John Romita too much is his inking work. I mean, It is a very, very bold way of inking. He was a brush inker rather than a pen inker, but he did actually mix and match on occasion depending on how much fine line was required. So again, we're seeing fine webbing. There is the folds in the cloth, the detail in the actual cloth of the cloak of Doctor Strange. All the usual angles that make such dynamic poses. So again, this one is drawn and inked by Romita. Now this has a lot of brown on it because there's something like glue has been applied. It could have been that the artwork at the time was pinned to something else that had a lot of glue, and it's yellowed over the years. But most of the time when you see that much yellow, there was no correction to the artwork being done here. It was just probably marked against something else. What you will tend to find is that when John Romita made mistakes, he would use whiteout or Tipp-Ex of a sort to actually white out areas. And he wouldn't be worried too much about the blue because that wouldn't photostat. But just look at the detail on these panels here. It's just stunning how you can tell when something's day, when something's night, when something requires a lot more darkening. And the way that he drew the women in Spider-Man was just absolutely wonderful. Look at the distort in Peter Parker here. He looks like the world is on his shoulders. And again, I wouldn't mind having the world on my shoulders if I was dating Gwen Stacy. Lovely, lovely. Again, here it's just wonderful how the web sort of like clings to the body, make it look like the person can't move. See how the hand is protruding forward, that which in a much more dynamic pose. Somebody else might have drawn a fist. But when you think that when we suddenly wake up from something, we tend to not have a fist clenched. It would be a hand outstretched. You'd knock your glass off of the side or something. So this is what an artist has to think about when they're drawing something, especially along the lines of Spider-Man, which is more a soap opera of a character. Again, he mixes his styles up with how many panels that are being used. So there's 4 panels here and 4 panels there, but in a totally different layout. Some landscape, some portrait. And what Steve Ditko used to do was do a standard 12 portrait where they were all little panels. What John Romita tended to do, he wanted larger work because he wanted to show more detail, more artwork. So more bang to your buck. I mean, look at the work here. It's absolutely astonishing. And that's about it for this video. I just wanted to give some highlights to my favourite artist's work, John Romita. Basically, he's such a clean artist, such a fine line drawer, that I've tried to buy absolutely everything that I can of John Romita's work. The artwork that's in here has taken a long time to collate because they would have been from private collectors that bought the work for thousands of pounds from Marvel over the years. Some of the artwork that's in here is still in photostat because they can't find the original collector that's bought them. A lot of his work will also have been destroyed, which is a great shame. But I hope you found this a fun or at least educational video. Maybe I'll do some more, but this is a very expensive and unusual book, something that a lot of collectors won't have, either just because of the price or the fact that there was a very low print number. So Until next time, I hope you enjoyed this. And WeeBob, I hope you found some lovely points of this particular artist. Thanks very much. Until next time, bye-bye.